Attention BetMGM customers. Have a friend who loves sports as much as you do? Here's a chance for both of you to earn a $50 bonus when they sign up through BetMGM's Refer a Friend program. Just sign into your BetMGM account and click on the Refer a Friend program to send your friend a message inviting them to register a new account in the same state you use BetMGM in. Once your friend signs up and makes a deposit, they'll receive a $50 bonus. And once your friend places a bet with their bonus and the wager is settled, you'll receive a $50 bonus as well. Share the excitement and get a $50 bonus every time you refer a friend to BetMGM. Visit BetMGM.com for terms and conditions. Must be 21 years of age or older to wager. New Jersey only. All promotions are subject to qualification and eligibility requirements. Rewards issued as non-withdrawable site credit. Site credit expires in 30 days. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.
Hey everyone, welcome to The Final Four is Not on the Schedule. I'm your host Eric, alongside with expert analyst Rod. Thanks for joining us on the best MSU basketball podcast featuring in-depth recruiting, game matchup, and post-game analysis. We dive deep to give you the best tools to enjoy the Spartans and impress your friends and family. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod. We're here to talk about Michigan State's narrow 64-63 defeat to first place Purdue Boilermakers at the Breslin Center. Michigan State trailed at halftime 27-25 after being down by, I think, as much as 9 or more in the first half. They got it back down to 2. Had a lead briefly in the second half and then sort of went back and forth for a while near the end. And Zach Edey and Fletcher Lawyer were just too much for Michigan State at the very end. Notables, obviously, the biggest news, of course, of the day was that Malik Hall was ruled out and sounds like for quite a while. Izzo seemed very, not very enthusiastic or hopeful, I think, of Malik Hall seeing the court for quite some time. And just so I think we have to wait to see what the diagnosis is and sort of what the plans are for him.
Yeah, on that note, and I'm sure we'll return to it, but it kind of went back and forth over the course of the weekend in terms of the kind of stuff that I was getting, which I think accurately reflects where they were. The latest, and Izzo kind of talked about this, was they got a verdict from a specialist this morning, and that was what he was referring to when he said it didn't look good.
Yeah.
Now again, the other thing that's kind of confusing is my understanding has been, and I don't know if you heard his post game. I didn't. Did he mention if it was the ankle? Do you know?
You know what? I don't know. I thought they were talking about the ankle. I'm trying to think of the pregame show when I listened to him talking. So I guess I would say I'm not sure.
My understanding was it was the ankle, so that it wasn't a re-aggravation of what he hurt in his foot, the stress reaction. But there's been so much conflicting information out there that I don't feel like that's a definitive. But again, my understanding coming out of the game, everything I heard over the weekend was focused on the ankle. So that's why I was a little surprised to hear that this is where they've landed. Look, you can have a really bad ankle injury. It's
Sure.
not that's not, it could be a high ankle sprain. I'm sure this is going to ramp people's anger up at the Howard family because, if it was in fact the ankle, it kind of started with Jet Howard's hip check at the end of the first half.
Yeah.
Against Wisconsin, but whatever. It's just one of those years for Malik Hall, which is really unfortunate because I feel like when he's played, he's been really, really good. He's been the guy that we thought he might be coming into the season. So it's really disappointing from that perspective. And of course, look, it's a big blow for Michigan State. It takes their margin for error way down. It removes a very valuable piece from the rotation at both ends. But I will say this, at least for today, I I don't, would it have made a difference? Yeah, probably. But I feel like for the most part, Michigan State played a very good game. I was not unhappy with the way they played. And I think it's a crying shame that they ended up taking the loss, because I think they played well enough to win.
Yep. No
And
question.
at the same time, I don't feel Purdue came out and played their C game either. I think Michigan State really went at them toe to toe. And, we'll talk about, I hate talking about officiating.
Yeah.
And those of us, our listeners know that that's not something that we typically spend a great deal of time talking about, but it needs to be talked about in this game, because it was a really, really bad effort from this officiating crew. I mean, they were just not good.
Yeah.
And it hurt. There were big moments that hurt Michigan State that you can point at as, there were, let's put it this way. There were egregious calls that were made that came early enough in the game that you say, well, okay, that was a horrible call. The prime example of that was just an unbelievably awful call on Mady Sissoko, where first of all, the play leading to the play where Mady got called for the foul was in fact a foul on Purdue. I can't remember which guy it was behind Tyson Walker, clearly bumped him as he went up for a mid-range jumper. I mean, it wasn't even close. It was an obvious foul, no call. Edey kind of secures the rebound, but he has Mady in the textbook definition of a hook and hold, and essentially throws him to the ground at the end of it.
That was crazy.
And the call, and not only is there no hook and hold, there's a foul called on Sissoko. It was awful. You couldn't botch that play any more thoroughly than that crew did. But it happened early enough that you don't worry about it. There were two big calls late, very late, that really did play a major role in the outcome. One, I've got slightly more sympathy for them on, which was the out of bounds call that ended up giving the ball back to Purdue. You were at the game, so you probably haven't had the benefit of the 100 million replays.
We saw a lot of them on the board.
But
they're pretty. It was pretty definitive.
You saw a lot of them.
It was not a dark hand touching the ball. I'd say that much.
Yeah, it looked like Edey to me, but I will go so far as to admit that I can't say it was 100% with 100% certitude.
Sure.
The problem with that is then when you have an officiating crew that lacks ability, and I mean, I'll say that they were not good all day, so I can say they're not good. And they have a bailout option. That's what they chose.
Yeah, right.
They can say, well, look, we just couldn't tell. It was too close. There's nothing definitive. So, we're going to throw it to possession. Well, that's still bullshit. If the call is there to be made, you make the call. But whatever. At least that one, as I say, I can have a little tiny bit of sympathy because it was close. I can sit here and say, I'm 90% certain that went off Edey. I probably can't say I'm 100%.
Sure. Yeah.
Because there was no definitively great obvious angle. There were some that made it look like it went off Edey, but not enough to where I could say yes with metaphysical certitude. That's Michigan State ball.
Yeah.
But the foul call on Tyson Walker trying to fight over the screen on Foster Lawyer, that was a horrendous call.
I don't understand it.
It was a joke. It was an absolute joke. And I don't know whether they replayed that one at Breslin or not. I think they probably did.
They did, but it, as bad in live as it was in replay.
Yeah, it was disgraceful in a game. And this is part of the reason why I say that. And we come back to this theme several times this year, that game, despite the number of fouls called, which there were a fair amount, especially in the second half, both ways.
Yep.
Both teams were in the double bonus with several minutes to play. So there were a lot of fouls whistled. But even despite that, I'm of the belief that they let a ton of contact go. in that game, an absolute ton of it. Both teams played very, very physically. I would argue Purdue played more physically than Michigan State did. And so in that kind of environment, forget the game situation. In that kind of environment, you call that?
Yeah, right.
That's a lack of consistency. And that's what I think you can properly go after an officiating crew for, is when they are not consistent in how they're calling a game. There are games that are called so tightly that I could say, all right, I could see where they might blow the whistle on that, because they're blowing anyone who as much as breathes on an offensive player.
Yeah.
Right? We've seen those kind of games. This was not that kind of game. So in that circumstance, no, you cannot blow the whistle on that. You can't do it. And so those were the two that really stick in my mind because of the timing of them. But there were a lot of others. I mean, this was just a bad job. They struggled with a shot clock. They just over and over and over. And you wonder at what point is the Big Ten finally going to decide that it's got a problem that it needs to address. I'm not even going to the fact that, I accept when Michigan State goes on the road, such as in our last game against Illinois, that you're going to be operating at a disadvantage. I accept that because that's historically the case. Officials are human. Crowds tend to get to officials and influence some calls, and that's just the way it goes historically. But then I see Michigan State not get that benefit at all.
Do they ever? I feel like it's very unusual for us to have a big, aside from like Brown comes into town or something like that. I feel like it's not too often that we get a whole lot of extra calls, but I don't know. Maybe that's just the insufferable guy behind me.
Here's the other thing to think about. Historically, Michigan State is a physically aggressive team. So that might explain some of it. I haven't gone back and done, I wish somebody would, done a study on that as to how much of a differential there typically is for MSU in foul calls, home versus away. Mm-hmm. I've got to believe there's some, but it might not be as wide as, say, a Wisconsin or a Purdue typically gets. I don't know. But this is another important point about this Michigan State team. We've got basically half a season's worth of data now that says this team doesn't foul very much.
Right. Yeah.
So what are you doing? And Purdue doesn't get a lot of fouls called on them either, but I would suggest that at least in this game, they were the more physical of the two teams. How Zach Edey and watching the broadcast, I love Bill Raftery. I think he's as good as there has ever been at that job. I think he's great. But that question came up. Boy, Zach Edey doesn't get a lot of fouls. The play-by-play guy made the point. He's like, Purdue fans feel like Zach Edey gets beat on all game long, but opponents of Purdue can look at the track record and say Zach Edey's only had something like, I think he said 27 or 29 fouls called on him the entire season. And Raf's answer, I get it, was, well, he plays in drop coverage a lot, so he's not necessarily picking up a lot of fouls, big men trying to play the pick and roll or, getting caught away from the rim that a lot of other big men are. All right, that might explain some of it, but that's a pretty extreme stat. And watching this game, look, I could make an argument, and they're never going to call it in a situation like that, but the game-winning shot, you might have been able to call Zach Edey for an offensive foul.
His left arm, yeah.
You might have. I mean, that would not have been like a complete outlier of a call. You will see those calls made. Now, in that situation, no. A guy trying to fight over the top of a screen in a similar situation, apparently, yes. But
yeah.
It was Zach Edey, I'm sorry, wonderful player and does some great things. But Zach Edey plays more physically than his foul numbers would suggest he does. And the Big Ten's got to get on top of that.
Yeah, especially the offensive rebounding, right? I mean, he went over top of some.
Well, he went over Sissoko's back,
and
and that was one the broadcast crew actually harped on.
Yeah.
I said it a couple times.
And, look, talking about those two blown calls late in the game, I think, had that one call been for Michigan State, I think they would have kept it with Michigan State and supposed to make it a jump ball. But, they probably didn't feel there was enough to reverse it. But that call on the going around the screen that's just for the same reason I don't think they should have called the foul on Edey with his shot with his arm extended. But the same thing, like you said, there's no reason Walker should have gotten fouled. There's hardly any contact there. You're gifting Purdue 2 points. I just don't understand.
If you're going to call that, you're going to call 90% of defenders' attempts to get out on top of a screen.
There wasn't even that much contact.
It's just that simple.
Yeah.
It's that you would make that call 90% of the time.
Yeah. It was frustrating.
And the idea, a 6'1" Tyson Walker trying to get over the top of a 7'4" behemoth. Are you kidding me? I understand the foul was supposedly on Lawyer, but look at what Walker's got to do. And again, I'm not even asking for, well, you got a grade on the curve. Just call it the way you call those plays the other 39 minutes and 50 seconds.
Yeah, that was the disappointing thing.
It was very disappointing, especially in a game that really was. And I don't want this to become entirely, Michigan State got robbed. Look, Purdue went out and made plays. I mean, Fletcher Lawyer, the other freshman guard, I think the moment got to him. I don't think Smith played very well at all. He looked
pretty terrible, yeah.
But Fletcher Lawyer, man, he made plays, offensively at least.
Yes.
He made plays. And down the stretch, Caleb First, massive three-pointer from the corner after Michigan State had seemingly off a Walker 3, had gotten the lead up to 4 and really seemed to be going in for the kill.
Yep.
Purdue comes right back. First nails that 3. Zach Edey, we'll talk about his game in detail because I actually think, all things considered, I thought Michigan State did a wonderful job against him.
I agree.
I mean, that's crazy to say about a guy who scored 30, whatever it was, 30 some points, but it's true. And yet you got to give him credit. I mean, he made enough plays when it counted. I'll ask you, because you were in the building, when Tyson Walker went up for that 3 at the last shot, did you think it was good?
No.
Okay.
No, it didn't look. The angle looked wrong, and I think it's because Morton blocked it partially. Like once it left his hands, it looked like it was gonna be way short, which is what happened. And it didn't look like he squared up because he doesn't have any time really to get a perfect look. But that's just from my angle.
In that situation, that's what I would have hoped for.
That was the look
Tyson Walker. Yeah,
he is open.
It was pretty amazing that it got to that. But yeah, just a heartbreaking loss because, as I say, they really did enough things well to deserve to win, and they did it while I don't think Purdue played poorly. That was not the case at all. It was 2 teams that played pretty damn well at both ends. And the other one just happened to score one more point.
Yeah, no, I think it's, and you can look back at it, missed opportunities. First 10 minutes of the game, Michigan State offensively was terrible. Missing shots, 8 turnovers, or actually 8 turnovers in the first half. AJ did not look good. Lots of open looks missed, both mid-range and for 3. Pierre Brooks had 3 threes. 2 of those were really good looks. Missed them both. We missed all 3 actually, but I think there are plenty of opportunities. Missed free throws by AJ in a game that's 1 point, right? I mean, every point matters, and the game was there, and it's too bad because it was one that definitely could get. It's one that you're definitely gonna need because without Hall, I mean, let's be honest, this team is gonna be a dogfight to make the NCAA tournament. I think. I mean, I'm not spelling doom, but we know how to play without Hall, but it's not going to be easy. There aren't many easy games to pick up wins.
And with the Big Ten as deep as it is, but I have some thoughts on that. I think one is that you play the way that you played today, and you play that way, against anybody else in this league, you're almost certainly winning.
Sure, I agree with that.
So they know they're capable of doing that. I think the second thing is, it's not a direct, well, if this guy does this, it solves the problem of the absence of Hall, but I do think the big takeaway for me coming out of this game, and because we've seen this before, I don't know if I believe it's what will happen, but Tyson Walker needs to be that aggressive.
Yes.
Tyson Walker is, and I've said this before, I said it last season, I've said it at other points this year, and you see it again today. And today was a very good lesson in that, because early on he was taking good shots that weren't falling. And in the past, that has led him to maybe start looking to just try to find other people and not focus on getting his own, right?
Yep.
Today, that didn't happen, out of necessity, because it's what they had going because of the way Purdue was choosing to defend. Shots were going to be there for Tyson, and he remained aggressive. And he took 23 shots from the floor. That has to be a career high. I haven't looked it up, but a Michigan State career high for him.
Yeah.
But honestly, if they get anything close to that kind of Tyson Walker, and again, I'm not talking about 30 points, but just in terms of being that aggressive, the dynamic can change. I mean, Michigan State still has the best backcourt in the conference, in my opinion. That hasn't changed after today at all. And that's still a lot to work with. So, I understand people feel like, oh, it's going to be a struggle. Let's see. Let's see how it goes.
We'll know more in 2 games, right? I think once after the Rutgers and Indiana game, we'll see if this team can still compete with anyone in the Big Ten, because those are,
right.
Certainly Rutgers, and then of course on the road at Indiana. You pull 1 or 2 of those games out, then I think you feel like you're in the fight.
You win both of those, you're 6-3.
Oh yeah, then you're great if you get both of those.
Yeah,
yeah,
and you're right. I mean, I think the fair thing to say is that the margin of error is really reduced. We know that, but I also know that it's funny because when I look at it, not that he's proven to be anywhere near this type of player, but honestly, what I was thinking when I was watching Tyson Walker go through that exhibition today was, without Malik, there are elements of this team that kind of remind me of the team Sean Respert's senior year. That team was not loaded with great offensive performers. It had one guy, basically, and then other solid players.
Mm-hmm.
It was a different team, and Sean is obviously a very different even style of player than Tyson, but the thing about Tyson Walker is, because of his handle and his quickness, he truly is one guy who is capable of creating his own offense.
Yeah.
I mean, what I loved, and I mean, if we're going to accentuate the positive, the way Michigan State played offensively down the stretch, it was almost as if you had a turbo-sized Cassius Winston out there, because Tyson Walker was just running Purdue off screen, rescreen. I haven't seen that really since Cassius.
Yep.
And he was delivering on those shots, but that's the thing he gives you, is like Cassius, he has a great handle. The advantage he's got over Cassius is that he's quicker. He's even quicker. So it's easier for him to create space even than it was for Cash. But I think they need to do more of that. I feel confident in saying that much.
Yeah.
And that Tyson Walker is a very bad man. I mean, Purdue did not have an answer for him. They just didn't.
And I think you're right. I think no one does. I don't think there's anyone in the league that's going to be able to shut him down.
Yeah, it's that element that tells me, you know what? Okay, we know now they're not going to have Malik. That reduces the kind of options you have offensively. So maybe it means one of the ways you adjust to that, because they don't have a lot of other choices. Yeah, you could get more out of Pierre Brooks potentially. But I mean, Joey is Joey. We kind of know what and he'll have games that are a little better or a little less. But basically he's going to do what he, today, what do you have? 10 points,
10 points. He's 1 of 4 from 3. So
that's kind of a low. Yeah. That's kind of a lower end Joey Hauser performance, but he made some big plays.
Yep.
And, he delivered. AJ Hogard, kind of is what he is. You are aware, and that's a very high level player overall, but you don't, AJ's not suddenly going to be shooting 45% from three.
No.
I guess the two guys I would say, one, I still think there is much more to be unlocked with Jaden Akins. But the other thing is a more aggressive Tyson Walker is capable of doing these kind of things more often than we've seen. I mean, I think he's been much, much better than he was a year ago, but there's still room for more of this. I mean, he is capable of going on a run where, he could string together, if his mentality's right, he's fully capable of stringing together several games in this general realm.
Yeah. I feel like, when with Cassius and Xavier's team, there's no question it's Cassius, that people have said the last couple of years, there really hasn't been a go-to player. I don't think there's any question at this point that it's Walker, right? I mean, he's the guy who's going to keep this engine running on the offensive end, and everyone else is going to contribute, like you said earlier. But I think it's going to come down to how well he plays and hits those mid ranges. And I don't know. I mean, I agree with you. I think this team they're not finished or anything without having Hall. And, maybe it simplifies things, right? I mean, because you have less question of where the points are coming from and from an offensive set.
Yeah.
And Madi was very good setting screens, and Tyson, it even put Morton on him at the end, and it didn't matter. Morton couldn't stop him either, despite the height and his being a really good defender.
Well, it's funny. I felt like, they had stretches where they went to the bench too much, but I'm looking at the minutes. Tyson 37, Hogard 36, Hauser 38, Akins 32. That's going to be where they have to live.
Yeah, unfortunately.
I mean, it really is.
Yeah.
Madi with 22, that's the one position where, they're not going to go over 30, but they're going to have to live there. That's the thing that, that Hall does. So one other aspect of the injury is I think it's always tough to get this going in Big Ten play anyway, but I think this pretty much puts the final nail in the coffin of seeing a hell of a lot more out of the transition game.
Sure. Because
they just can't play that way. They've got it with the minutes they got to squeeze out of these guys. They've got to be conservative, I think, with how they approach their offense.
It'll be running in spots, right? Like, Jaden Akins gets a steal. You obviously run.
Yeah. Opportunistic breaks. Yeah. And that's probably going to be about it. Yeah.
That's probably about it too. Other positives I thought about this game too. I mean, I thought Madi played very well defensively. He didn't attempt a shot, but he didn't, you're not going to go up and try post work against Zach Edey, especially when you don't have super talented post players. I thought he played pretty well. I thought Jackson Kohler played pretty well. He came in and as soon as Edey left the game, they couldn't do anything defensively. Michigan State just tore him to pieces. Kohler's in there and getting his, he just fouled out that, Trey Kaufman-Wren right away. I mean, the guy was just hopeless. I mean, to what you said earlier about Jack Ebling, that if this team without Zach Edey, they're one Edey away from not making the tournament. And but I think you could probably say about the Bulls, like, they didn't have Michael Jordan. They would have put, and I don't see a guy like that is going to play and not,
The caveat to that is big men, and especially really, really, really tall, like unusually tall big men, tend to be more vulnerable. There's a reason why you don't see, there's many reasons why you don't see guys Edey size running around the Big Ten or the NBA. First of all, there aren't that many of them in the world. Yeah, exactly. Secondly, the game has evolved in a way that they can't, but the other thing is when you look at guys who are in that 7'4", 7'5", 7'6" range, they tend to have injury problems. And who knows, maybe he'll be an exception. I don't think he's had a serious injury his entire, 2+ years, 2.5 years now at Purdue. But man, that's a risk. And especially so when you're running him out there, he played
36 minutes.
36 minutes.
Way more than I'm sure he usually does. There's no way he plays that much.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Because you're right. They could not get away with having him off the floor. I mean, when he came off the floor, Michigan State went to work. Either with, Kohler had the one post up bucket, but then you were able to see them get to the rim and finish much more.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah, it's an interesting deal, but I thought both of Michigan State's freshman bigs did all right.
Yeah, I was going to say Cooper looked really good.
Yeah, all three of them. They hung in there. Look, we wondered, well, we'll talk about it when we get to the keys. We wondered strategically what Michigan State was going to do. And I think for the most part, they answered pretty emphatically. Now, I do want to call attention just to get your opinion on this, because I have one. The last Purdue possession.
Oh, the one my wife turned me. Why did they double him?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we're on the same page. It sounds like.
I think so.
Michigan State, just to set the stage, Michigan State has taken the lead on a Tyson Walker jumper. There's 11 seconds left. You had to know that that's what Purdue was going to do. Because 11 seconds is enough time. Unless you're just harassing the shit out of them, pressuring them in the backcourt. And Michigan State had token pressure, but not anything substantial. And by the way, I'm not advocating for them doing more, because you ran a risk of getting with this crew, you run the risk of getting a foul call.
Right.
The question is, should they have had a double automatically the moment that the ball goes into Edey?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you could see the game. Purdue had their players spaced really wide on that. So they had a player in each corner. The other guard was the far side away from Edey. So he was up playing outside the arc. It was pretty much a two-man game. And so if you bring a double, you're leaving a shooter wide open on the corner. Now, maybe you say, well, that's what we want. Morton wasn't out there, who was terrible from three, like we had talked about in the pregame. That's the poison, because if you try and double with the person on Lawyer's just going to go right by you and score. So I felt like it was.
Well, that was never in the cards, right? I agree with that. You can't dig off Lawyer. My question, and I haven't gone back to look at it, so I don't know if you saw, the guy who seemed to me to be in the best position to maybe come over and disrupt him was Akins. Akins was on, Edey caught it. If you're Purdue on offense, looking at the basket, Edey caught it on the left-hand side of the lane and then came into the middle. Akins was coming from the right-hand side of the lane. I'm not sure who he was guarding.
I don't
over
remember.
There. Was it Smith? That would be the issue. And I honestly, I can't answer that. I don't know who he was guarding. But the argument, and I'm not saying I land in either camp definitively, and it's really easy to say, oh, they made the wrong call when Purdue wins the game that way. I guess the way I look at it is, you're in a 1-point game. So a bucket from the floor, wherever it comes from, is going to beat you.
Yeah, right.
So question is, do you like your odds better with Zach Edey taking a shot? Now, as it turned out, with the spin and his length, he just dropped it through the bucket. I mean, it wasn't even like a short hook shot or anything.
Right.
It was a literal lay-in. But even if it had been like a short hook, do you like your odds better, him missing that against one-on-one coverage, or somebody else taking an open three? And my argument would be, that is not the same decision as the one you make over the course of 40 minutes.
Sure.
I think Michigan State's defensive approach over the course of 40 minutes unquestionably was the right one.
Mm-hmm.
They were in position because of it to win that game. So in part because of it. But that doesn't mean you have to adhere to that in a one possession win or lose situation, right?
Yeah.
That can be a sound decision to handle it differently when you're talking about one possession to win or lose. And Izzo in the post game, I gather, I saw a quote from him that he said, look, he'd do it again that way. I get it. That's the horse he rode the whole way. But I would like to hope that I'm not saying this as a result of hindsight, but that I would have said the same thing had I been presented with this scenario 24 hours ago, that maybe that's the spot that's an exception.
Yeah.
Maybe that, even if I know this, it wasn't going to be Fletcher Lawyer taking that shot if Jaden Akins had come on a double.
Right.
It was somebody else, whomever he was guarding, be that, I'm guessing it was either Smith or, do you know, maybe Newman was out there, I would think.
Maybe. I'm not sure who it was.
It
I'll
was
be
either
honest.
Newman or Jenkins, probably, because as you say, Morton was off the floor. So it had to be Newman or Jenkins. Probably Newman because he's a better shooter. So it was probably either Smith or Newman. Those guys are good shooters, but Smith shoots 40% from three. Newman is at about 34. I think now you could say, well, yeah, but it would be a wide open shot.
Yeah.
The percentages likely go up. Okay. I still probably like my odds better with that rather than Zach Edey in the middle of the lane. Never mind dropping it through the rim.
Right. I mean, Edey was shooting 50% from the game. He shoots 60 some percent overall because he's taking these close shots. You think if you bring a double there, right? A lot of things can happen. For one thing, Purdue doesn't have much time. I mean, he dropped it through. Right. There's still 2.5 seconds left. So if you bring a double and force him to make a decision, well, that takes some time to process. Then he has to throw it out to someone. Then they have to shoot it. Now, maybe they make it and the game's over right then. There's no time to come down and have a last second shot. But I totally agree. Your odds are much better because any point, and even if you fouled Edey, well, then he gets 2 free throws, and maybe then you can, he splits them or something. Yeah, I totally agree. I thought, and I think that was probably the wrong move. And I don't know. Who knows if that was the plan, right? I mean, I think players can
right. We don't know. I mean, Izzo's answer
he won't tell us.
Games suggests that it was, but right. What was that a failure? Because here's the thing. Jaden Akins, when the shot was released, Jaden Akins wasn't that far away from it.
No. He could have gone up doubled. And honestly, if they pass out to he could at least been flying at the guy, shooting at last second, high pressure. He had a guy who had made an outside shot all game. You're forcing him to make the amazing, game winning shot, which maybe he'll make, but you like your chances there more than Edey throwing in from 4 feet away.
I think in retrospect, that probably would have been the decision I made, but the guy making it's in the Hall of Fame. It was a tough way to lose it because, honestly, Purdue didn't have to work that hard for it.
No, it looked pretty easy.
They had the guy who is their best post entry passer, Lawyer, make the post entry. And you're not going to get his defender to dig because they're definitely not going to come off Lawyer. And so then, from that point, it's just Edey making a move after something that could have been called an offensive foul, but wasn't, spinning into the lane and just laying it in. It was very, very easy. And you hope at a minimum, the idea is you want to make that shot hard.
Yeah.
And it was not hard.
Right. They were making it hard early in the first half, right? I think they gave him enough.
They made it harder for almost all of the game.
Yeah.
But there were occasionally moments where Edey got loose and got an easy one. Most of the time, because he's so huge and he's good enough that sometimes it'll happen. But for the most part, Michigan State made it hard on him. And I suspect that, assuming that was the actual way Michigan State wanted to play it, that Izzo's thought was he's just going to have Mahdi body him up, and Mahdi's going to make him take a contested, 8-foot half hook shot. A lot of the shots that Edey took and a lot of the shots that Edey missed were similar, but he was able to get the advantage and kind of spin his body toward the rim, and it ended up being very, very easy, which was unfortunate.
The one other thing I wanted to discuss before we go through the keys is Pierre Brooks. He played 12 minutes, 0 for 3 from 3, missed a 2-point shot as well. He had 3 rebounds, 2 of them offensive, turnover, but he was really a kind of a disaster on defense. He was leaving people missing assignments. A lot of those buckets that Edey had and that were his missed assignments, forcing people to react. And I don't know. I mean, if he's not scoring, he's out. It's sort of, this reminds me of Marble a lot. Like if he's not scoring, there's not much use having him out on the floor.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know what to do about Brooks because you figure he's going to log some more minutes because if it's not Brooks, it's going to be Whitens, and then you give up all your offense for maybe a little bit of defense.
Look, we had said earlier in the season, well, this is kind of a key point for Pierre, and he didn't, he had some moments during that stretch when Hall was out, but He didn't exactly seize a role, right? And that's been reflected in the fact that his minutes have gone way down since Malik came back. Well, there's another opportunity now out of necessity.
Mm-hmm.
And this is probably it for Pierre's career at Michigan State. I mean, I don't think I'm being hyperbolic with that. I think that, there's a lot to process, and we got a long, long, long way to go. But I will say at this point, if it were to be the case that Malik Hall doesn't come back, I do think, and again, this is without any detailed knowledge, just my little bit of knowing the lay of the land, I think your odds of Malik Hall opting to come back for a true senior year are better than they would have been.
Sure.
Sure.
Right.
Had he played this year uninterrupted, or even played the rest of this year out. I think they're better for a variety of reasons. Gives him another opportunity to prove himself, gives him an opportunity to end his career the way he probably would want to. There's a lot of things going on there. No guarantees at all. But if that were to happen, and then you add in the guys at Michigan State's bringing in, it might be a situation where there's just not enough room for Pierre to get consistent minutes. So on the other hand, if he can prove himself during this stretch, then he can force his way back into that conversation. So it's big for the team, and it's big for Pierre's future, what he does over the next several weeks.
Yeah. I mean, he was briefly above 40% from three. He's missed most of his shots since then. If he hits 2 of those threes, and he gets 3 rebounds, I mean, we're like,
right.
You pay for a little bit on the defensive end, but he's giving you some offense. He's giving you some rebounding, offensive boards. He makes himself, he has an argument to be on the floor right now. It's hard to say, aside from the rebounding, which, is good, but it's not enough for what, to the minutes. That
and look, and the minutes told the story in this game. I mean, Tom Izzo, would love to not have his starters logging those kind of minutes,
Sure.
but they did.
Yeah.
And Pierre played 12 minutes. Well, that's for a reason.
Yeah. All right. Well, why don't we go to our keys to the game? Before that, we'll do a brief message.
Binge a podcast series that unites sports and true crime in The Rumor, and enjoy as friends, lifelong Oriole fans, and seekers of truth Mac and Sam attempt to unravel a salacious 24-year-old rumor involving Oriole legend Cal Ripken Jr. and Hollywood's Kevin Costner. If their investigation reveals the rumor is true, it would change the way we think about baseball, reality, and the very nature of how myths are made and destroyed. Binge The Rumor on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, so keys to the game. First one, I think we've talked about quite a bit, was Malik Hall. Our assumption was he was coming back. He obviously didn't play, and not only did he not play, he's out for a potentially long period of time. I don't know, there's much more else to say about this, except he probably would have been helpful on some level somewhere. It's probably worth at least a point or two.
I think the one thing I would say is, of course, it's a different game if he's out there today, but I think the impact is obviously much more on a macro level than it was. If they'd had, it's hard to point to particular situations in this game and say, boy, they really missed Malik in this area. Like in the Illinois game, I could point to the fact that they did not have him down the stretch as an option to guard Matthew Meyer, right?
Right.
This one, I don't know. Would he have guarded Fletcher Lawyer? Maybe, but I don't know. I don't know if I believe that would have been a game changer. So it wasn't so much, in my opinion, about his absence in this one, but rather what's it going to mean over the next several weeks.
Yeah, and I think some rest. But I would say this about Hall, that's been interesting watching the team this game versus the previous stint without Malik Hall, which was early in the season. The defense, especially Mady Sissoko, do not seem as lost. Like they're much more connected. They had a good defensive effort, and I would say, aside from Brooks occasionally getting lost, they were pretty sound, and they didn't require the Malik Hall like they needed earlier in the season.
Keep a couple things in mind there. One being that they've been through it, Two, you did not see Pierre Brooks playing as much as he did in a lot of those games you're talking about.
True.
Three, they have a Jaden Akins who's basically at or near 100%, which they didn't have for at least some of that first stretch without Malik. And then even when they did, he was still trying to round into form.
Yeah, 32 minutes.
Whereas now
right?
I
He's
think
ready. Yeah,
that's a big difference.
Yeah.
So I'm with you. That's another thing to take out of this game is that keep in mind, the Purdue Boilermakers came into this game the number one offense in America.
They're pretty good, right?
They were the number one offense in terms of efficiency. They were the number one offensive rebounding team in America. Michigan State held this team to 42% from the floor, 40% from three, but they only got off 10 attempts. And then they only grabbed 8 offensive rebounds out of 30 misses.
Yeah.
Michigan State played very well defensively in this game. So I think that's something that should not be forgotten. And when people start talking about, struggle to get to the tournament, if I maintain, if they do a lot of the things they did today going forward, they're likely going to be fine.
Yeah, right.
For that purpose, I think you can say what Malik Hall being out does is it probably eliminates any realistic shot at contention for a Big Ten title. That I'll buy.
Yeah, I agree.
But I'm not nearly at a point yet where I say, it's going to be dicey for the tournament. We'll see.
All right. Well, the number 2 key of the game was the gravitational force in the universe. Zach Edey, 7'4", 300 pounds. He scored 32. He shot 50%, which is below his average. He usually averages a little over 60%. He shot 50%, 13 is 26, 6 or 7 from the line. So he's good there. Only 4 offensive rebounds, which is under his usual, although he ended up with 17 boards overall. He actually had well over half of the rebounds for the Purdue Boilermakers. I think it was a tactical decision by Michigan State, aside from that last possession, which we talked about. I think they did a really good job on him. They didn't make his life too easy. He would have worked for most of his points, and he really struggled early in that game, and they made him play 36 minutes because Purdue had no answers for the 5's position if he wasn't there.
No, look, I do not fault Michigan State's defensive game plan. Again, considering what they're going up against, that worked.
Yeah.
And you can say if they'd been a little bit more dialed in offensively earlier on, when they had missed a lot of makeable shots,
Yep.
it's a different result there as well. But I think defensively, I've got no complaints. Again, other than I think you could debate that last possession, but over the course of 40 minutes, it was clearly the right way to play it. And it's a successful approach that Michigan State has used against this program in the past. And I think it worked today. I just think that the other team managed to make one more play, but I can't say that they went at it in a way that was detrimental to their chances of winning. It gave them a chance to win.
Some would argue that player was wearing stripes. So then the number 3 key to the game was threes. Michigan State shot 31.6%, 6 of 19. Again, a lot of open looks missing in the first half, only shot 2 of 8. And that was really, you could argue that's the difference. There weren't a whole lot of bad threes they took. I mean, the Walker last 3, of course. Pierre Brooks had one that was pretty well covered. Other than that, they were all pretty good. I guess, Hogarth shot 3 of them.
They also had one, and I'm not sure who took it. Maybe it was Hauser at the end of the first half, which was one of those desperation heaves that probably shouldn't have even counted.
Yeah.
I'm not sure who took it. But yeah, it wasn't great. Look, you'd like to see a little better production out there. But the second half was more like it.
Yeah. The
second half, we saw Michigan State a little closer to what we have come to expect of them.
Still only 36%. I think they're a better shooting team than that still. But, I guess I don't know. Maybe now they've not been great shooting the last 3 games. So I don't know. At some point, maybe they've solved this problem.
It's certainly worth keeping an eye on, because especially now that you take away a Malik Hall who gives you other scoring options because of the way he can operate in the post. That's gone now. So the three is going to only increase in terms of its importance. And that's another reason why I say, Tyson Walker as a guy who remains aggressive, very, very important.
Yeah. I mean, he was 4 of 8. He was shot over 50% from the field in general.
Yeah.
And, and then as far as you look at threes for Purdue, I thought it was really good. They left Morton open. He didn't hit any of them. He didn't miss all 3. They just had just enough, right? Gillis and First both hit theirs, and
First was a really, really big shot, and that probably gets lost in the shuffle. But Michigan State gets a 3 from Walker to go up 4 points. That felt to me like, and I think we were under 2 minutes at that point. That felt like a huge shot, and then Purdue comes right back. And, First is a capable shooter, but he's not a dead-eye guy. I think he's around 35% on the year. So he's not quite as effective as he was as a freshman. You could probably live with that given some of the alternatives.
Yeah.
With him getting that shot, but he nailed it.
Yeah.
And it happened quick.
Yeah, it was for early shot clock, like within the first 10 seconds, I think.
It happened really quick. So that feeling of momentum that you had after Walker hits his, you're like, all right, we got him down 2 possessions. And then Purdue comes right back.
Yeah.
And immediately, which is not something you necessarily expect that team to do because they're not a fast-paced team. But they get that 3 from him. That was huge, just huge.
And when Michigan State made that run in the first half to close it out to just 2, I was joking with my wife. I said they're playing the Abe defense, which is anybody but Edey. You just and pretty much anyone else who tried to do anything, they were stopped. It was only Edey scoring in that first half, and they pretty much limited damage for quite a while there. But so then fourth key to the game, the mid-range game, which I know is like nails in a chalkboard to Nate Oates at Alabama, but Tyson Walker, I mean, he was lights out. He was great. 12 of 23 from the field. Hogarth 6 of 12. Hauser 4 of 8.
Yep.
What more can you say except they got what they wanted. A number of times they got Edey on switches where he was stuck isolated against Walker, who was just either go past him or shoot over him. So I think they did a great job with that. It was much better than they were against Illinois.
Well, the only issue I had with it is that in the first half, they didn't hit enough.
Yeah, they're missing out ones that are
makeable shots.
Yeah.
That's the thing. And Rafferty mentioned it on the broadcast. Like you're going to get those shots against Purdue. You got to hit them.
Yep. And
they just didn't hit quite enough. But overall, I think they did the things. Like I say, there's not a lot to get irate about because they played a pretty good game.
Yeah.
I mean, again, against a Purdue defense that's been very good this year. Michigan State shoots 47% from the floor, 52% in the second half. You'd hope maybe you were dialed in a little better from 3 than they were, but it wasn't a disaster. They did some damage. So
yeah. Well, they scored 7 straight in the end of the game and missed the last. It kind of reminds you of the Illinois game where they just hit a bunch of shots in a row but unable to make any stops. This time, well, it's pretty much the same, right? You hit shots. It was kind of back and forth for a while. Well, let's talk about the number 5 key to the game, which the one I think that's surprising the most. I kept looking at the scoreboard, surprised. Actually, the scoreboard was broken for the first 8 minutes of the game, which is probably good because I knew Michigan State's shooting percentage was really low. But they beat Purdue on the boards. They had 30 rebounds to Purdue's 29. They both finished with 8 offensive rebounds. So Michigan State had an offensive rebounding rate of 28.6%, which is not great, but okay, especially against that team. And Purdue with 26% of their shots they rebounded. So, I mean, a huge success. I mean, I think we thought coming into this game there was no question that Michigan State was a good defensive rebounding team. I think we can definitively say, especially if we got that monster there rebounding, that they did a great job.
They did. I think the other stat, and those are all good numbers, the other stat that mattered, Purdue, a team that thrives on second chance points, only had 10 of them.
Right.
Now you could say off only 8 offensive rebounds, that's a pretty good efficiency rate. And it is, But Michigan State played them even there as well. They also had 10 off their 8 offensive rebounds. So, yeah, I think you play that team to a draw on the glass, you should feel pretty good about what you did. And it was and on a day where Edey was just a monster. Like, it wasn't an off day for Zach Edey as a rebounder.
I think this game shows you just how close margin is for Michigan State in so many things, right? Like, you win a number of things, but you have a few more turnovers. So you have a few more empty possessions. You have a few, a couple fouls here, there. Even with that, I know they didn't have to score a lot of points off the turnovers, but their possessions early in the game when probably you could have gotten something done. Cause I don't know, Purdue just seems sort of off on offense to start the game.
Well, AJ Hoggard was struggling mightily in those first 5 minutes. He had 2 passes, and I don't think they actually turned it over on either one, but 2 times he passed kind of blindly.
What was it to Joey?
To Joey Hauser, who was not looking. That's on AJ.
Yeah, well, I know.
You can't do that. And I don't know what was going on. But look, I'm not going to beat up AJ, because the fact is, after that, he got dialed in. And I think, you look at his game, 8 assists, 2 turnovers, 6 for 12 from the floor. That's a pretty good performance. I think in this one, if you want to look at the major difference, and, again, it's probably going to sound like crying, but Michigan State goes 7 for 10 from the line, Purdue 16 of 18.
Yeah.
There's your ball game.
Yep.
I mean, that really is it, and I don't feel it would be one thing if I felt like, and we've said it many times this year, Michigan State's got to defend better without fouling, that was not the case today. There should not have been that kind of differential. There just shouldn't have been. Not based on the physicality that both teams played with. I think anytime you see that kind of differential, and I'm not even getting into whose home court it was, but anytime you see that kind of differential, what you ought to be seeing is one team either playing much more physically than the other, or, being a step slow all day, and they had to, clutch and grab to kind of stay alive, and there have been days where that's been Michigan State. That was not today. So I think if you look across the board in this game, to me, the difference was there. And credit to Purdue for hitting the one, 16 of 18 is impressive. Yeah. They had guys, First is shooting sub 60%. I think that's an outlier. I don't think he's that bad a shooter, but he goes 3 for 4. Edey, who's a good free throw shooter this year, but he was great today, 6 for 7. They just didn't miss the shots that they got. So I think it's that. I think that Fletcher Lawyer gave them the second guy they needed down the stretch.
Yes. To
join Edey in terms of making plays, and a big day for him. I give him, even though he got bailed out on that foul call, look, other than that, guy made some great plays, including the entry pass for the winning bucket.
Yep.
It was a good pass because it got Edey, that can be an adventure if it's the wrong guy making the wrong entry. And he was note perfect. Got the ball exactly where it needed to be and allowed Edey to not have to reach for it, not get out of position to catch it, hit him right where he wanted it. He was able to go right into his move and make the play. So those were the things that I think made the difference ultimately in what was a very close game.
Well, I think it's no question that Purdue is the class of the league. They're the ones everyone's going to be chasing at this point, but they've shown that they're not invulnerable. And so you never know what things, as far as tripping up and stuff.
Look, are they the favorite to win the Big Ten? Sure. This is not a great Purdue team. They're a good Purdue team. And good might be good enough this year to do real damage in March. I'm not saying I don't think they can make a run. I'm just saying, if I lined this team up man for man against last year's Purdue team, despite the way they finished and all that, I would take last year's Purdue team every day of the week.
Sure.
But this one is playing a little better, or a little more consistently, at least. And sometimes that's how it goes.
Well, any other final thoughts?
Just, disappointing. And there's part of me that was really crushed by that.
Yeah.
Because combined with the Hall news, which is a paraphrase of what Izzo said in his post game, but you really would have liked to have won that, considering. But I also think that there's a lot to feel good about. When we people are obviously going to reach for comparisons to the last 2 years, right?
Yeah.
But I do think there's a pretty big difference here. The last 2 years when Michigan State was losing games, by and large, they were playing poorly. I can't think of a lot of games where I thought, boy, they played pretty well and they just came up short, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That didn't happen very much. This team, in both of these losses, against Illinois and then again today, played a lot of good basketball. So I still think there's reason for optimism, at least in terms of, getting to the tournament and then you see what happens from there. I reiterate the same thing we've been saying since the summer. Anytime you've got the kind of guard, and I don't think they've let us down in this for the most part. Anytime you've got the kind of guard play that Michigan State has, you got a chance.
Yeah, no question. The guard play is superior, and you saw them. They're tearing apart Smith and and Lawyer in the first half, and even throughout the whole game. There's superior guards.
I think on offense, Michigan State's guards clearly, they scored the two main guys. Even if you add in Akins, those three guys scored 49 points.
Yeah.
They whipped Purdue's backcourt, which is not, that's what should happen.
Right. That's your strength, right? But I think, if you get to the 5 spot seemed solid enough, right, to get you through the games. You don't need them score. It's an unusual Tom Izzo team where you don't have a whole lot of post scoring, but there's just a different way of playing. It's a different team, right? That's just the way it's been this season, and it's the way it's going to be, I think, through the end. And we'll just see how they turn out. So Michigan State drops to their second in a row. They fall to 4-3 in the Big Ten. They've lost. They're 2-2 at home now in the Big Ten play. Their next matchup is against Rutgers, who is currently, I think they're sitting probably in second place at 5-2. Another big game, a team that has been lethal on the road. They've won a number of road games. So we are going to see how they do. We'll come back with the matchup to that in just a day or so. And until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go Green.